So our next speaker is Sheila Krumholz. She is the executive director of OpenSecrets. OpenSecrets, as I'm sure you all know, is a nonprofit watchdog that tracks how money is spent in politics. So a number of you, mentioned some campaign finance questions already. She is the one to ask. She's going to go through a kind of give you a big picture look at where things stand in the year 2022, 2023, looking ahead. But also, you'll have time to ask questions at the end, and she can also talk about how to use OpenSecrets for your own reporting. She has testified in front of Congress, testified to the FEC, so she is certainly an expert source. So let's please join me in welcoming Sheila.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everyone. How many of you have used or at least are familiar with OpenSecrets? Yeah, everybody. Okay. Well, I hope good. Good. I hope that my comments are helpful. They might be kind of familiar to you since you are already avid users of our site. I think the most important thing I can tell you actually right off the bat is just to know folks at OpenSecrets, kind of to know who does what. Anna Masolia leads our editorial and investigations team, and she's a national expert on dark money, on foreign influence, on a wide variety of money and politics issues. So she's a great resource. Kelly Kaufman is our outreach manager, and she answers our press at crp.org. Taylor Giorno is our reporter. We love to answer, background questions, but also are always on the lookout for opportunities to co-report or team up. Hi. So those are three names you might be familiar with or want to touch base with on our media team, but we also have a large research team with people taking on different roles. So Doug Weber is our expert on candidates. He's got just a huge wealth of information on candidates and trends in candidate fundraising and spending going back in time. I could list them off: lobbying, donors, et cetera, but I'm here and happy to take your calls, your questions, and provide background, but very often I'm like, you need to talk to Dan. You need to talk to this other person who's really kind of got their finger on the pulse of what's going on right now and knows kind of the upcoming deadlines and what our process will be with ingesting the information and timing on when it'll be available. So on our website, I'll go through some things, and I'm happy to take your questions afterward and show you places on our website where you might find the answers to what you're looking for. But it's just always helpful to kind of look at the date that information was grabbed, so you know where you are in terms of the filing deadlines and know whether you've got the freshest data. You can always just call us and say, this is great, but do you have more recent data? And we'll just run the data for you. If we can do that for free, quickly, we'll do it for free. If it's like a extensive research project, we also do that too, custom research. But there can be a nominal fee for that. So anyway, I'm just gonna kind of launch into my presentation. Feel free to stop me or shout if I'm not paying attention. I'm gonna sit down if that's okay. And happy to kind of take your questions as we go. We are, of course, at kind of the worst time. Like, the election's over, we're on to the next election, but we don't even have the final numbers for the last election cycle, so it's this kind of netherworld between the two cycles. In fact, we were just I think our research team is now placing bets on what the new contribution limits are going to be for 23, because we just realized, we're about to get those. And inflation was actually a thing this time, and they're indexed to inflation in the off-election years. So I'm betting it's just going up from 2,900 to 3,000. Anyway, and I hope you're having a great program. I think the Paul Miller Fellows program is really amazing, and I'm glad to be back, and I hope you enjoy it. So I just want to also make sure just that we're on the same page. So the Center for Responsive Politics merged last year with the National Institute on Money and Politics, CRP, for 40 years tracked money at the federal level. The National Institute tracked money at the state level. We're still in the process of merging all of the data. In fact, we've got a huge tech lift coming later this year to move to a new database system that's going to be much more scalable and sustainable for the future. So we're like crossing my fingers that it's a smooth tech transition, but we're already moving state stuff onto the OpenSecrets website, including, for instance, ballot measures and state data for candidates. But more of that is coming. So we are, as I say, kind of a one-year-old organization, and also have 60 years combined background and expertise and experience. Our goal, of course, is to get this factual data and unbiased analysis to the voters. We're, in a way, a public interest group, but we work overwhelmingly with journalists. But we also serve academics with our bulk data. They're going to do kind of the heavy-duty longitudinal research that we don't have the mandate to do, and so we're pleased to do that. We also are thrilled when our data is picked up and used by advocates. We're not an advocacy organization. We advocate for transparency, but we are not a campaign finance organization. So we mostly, to disseminate the information as widely as possible, we work with journalists, and present our data in a way that we hope will be sufficiently detailed and backed up and accurate so that you're not running corrections. But ultimately, we hope that this data does, our purpose is to have this data be used in a way that creates a more vibrant, representative, and accountable democracy. It's a strange job we have because it's very focused on money, and that can seem very negative, like money's bad and there's too much money in politics. We're not taking positions on campaign finance reform. We don't have a position on Citizens United, but for dark money. Again, transparency is kind of essential to what we do, I think, to what you do, to what the voters do. So that, so much more money, dark money, has come out of the Citizens United decision, and we are advocating on that. But beyond that, we are strictly trying to put the data out there and let people draw their own conclusions. So I'm going to review a few highlights from the analysis of the funds from the last cycle, and try to give you a broad overview, but then we can talk about 23 and 24. Because we will be tracking, I say 23 because for us, the next elections upcoming are the gubernatorial and state, certain state executive elections in November. So for 22, as you can see, we've now combined state and federal elections. We're still projecting. We don't have the final data. We'll get that when filings are in on the 31st of this month. But we're projecting 16.7 billion, and based on the post-election, post-general data, that appears still to be on track, making this, of course, the most expensive midterm election in U.S. history. We say that every single cycle. We almost didn't say that in 2016. It was interesting because Trump, he doesn't need the money. So I think people took that to heart at first. They were like, well, he doesn't need the money. So he wasn't raising as much money. And we thought, oh my God, could this be the cycle where it actually goes down? Like, that's insane. It hasn't happened. But then outside groups swooped in right before the election and decided, okay, we're going to do this. So injected a lot of money, and it, in fact, we also saw a record, although barely. 2020 was a different story. That was $14.4 billion just at the federal level. And I think, the question is now, is that the new normal? Are we on a new trajectory? Because outside money, super PACs, 501c spending, I do think to some degree the country, Americans certainly, consultants are all in. But at some point, I think Americans become inured to the money. It's just like, another billion or another 10 billion, what does it matter? I do think they care about the money and the implications for government for sale, but I think they, at some point the numbers just, it's me-go, my eyes glaze over. So we have a final tally. We'll have the final tally after the year-end reports are in. I should note that some of the figures that I'll talk about today have already been updated on our site. Some sections of our site are updated multiple times a day. So really, OpenSecrets.org is the place to go. Or again, call us to see if that is if what you're seeing is the latest data, or just write us at press@crp.org if you have questions. So the green bar is federal, 8.9 billion for 22, up from 6.7 billion in 2018, inflation adjusted, and the blue bar is 7.8 billion, also a rise, and this includes all spending by candidates for state and federal office, national and state party committees, super PACs, 527 advocacy organizations, and overhead for PACs and joint fundraising committees. And I say that because in the past, the FEC has tallied total spending, and it's been higher than what we have, and that's because it includes everything they receive, everything they track, which includes double counting. So what we do is say, no, we've already included PACs to candidates and parties, we're just going to look at the overhead, and then we should have everything. So we think that these are the most inclusive but the most accurate numbers. And what that means is, as you can see here, spending in the midterm elections has been on a steep upward trajectory since 2014. But what's also interesting is the relative parity between the parties, the red and blue lines below. It's an arms race. As soon as the political ads drop supporting one party, the other party answers in kind. Our board member, Jennifer Victor, professor at political science, says scholars call this campaign inflation. We're all familiar with economic inflation, but what we're seeing is similar in politics, record-breaking spending because there's too many dollars chasing too few goods, creating incentives for outside spending groups, professionalized consultancies, nonstop fundraising, and increased spending on ballot initiatives. And these groups can do this because there are people, there are people who want to have a say in the process, and they have the means to do so because of extreme inequality in our country, and they are driving up the costs of campaigns by contributing and spending as much as they can on whatever airtime is available and online ads. They can also do this because, of course, the 2010 Citizens United decision led to these much looser campaign finance rules. And the fact that we see an even party split, again, suggests this arms race where if one side decides a contest is important to invest in, the other side does too. Outside spending is interesting because it is a drop in the bucket when you think about the overall amount spent, but it is so highly targeted to the most competitive races, the opportunities to pick up or flip a seat, or hold on to the majority. So that is where there is the potential for real impact. And what that means, all told, is that, again, we're seeing, I think here is what matters. Here's the impact on some level, is that every cycle, again, it's not just the overall total, but each candidate, the candidates overall need to spend more to win. We've all read, you've written the stories about how many hours a day legislators have to spend fundraising. They have to raise thousands of dollars every day. in order to raise enough to be viable. On average, members raise, well, they're limited this year to $2,900 per donor per election, so for each primary and general. Again, indexed to inflation. And these charts show through 2020, the amounts in the House, 2.4 million to run a winning House campaign on average. In the Senate, a huge leap to 27.2 million. And given the record spending this past cycle, we anticipate these numbers will continue to rise. And in fact, preliminary data that we have but haven't yet posted shows that the House is up again to $2.7 million. So that'll be complete at the end of the month. And the Senate is down. There's more volatility, of course, in the Senate, depending on which states have senators up for election. So that's down to 24.6 million. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Between 2018 and 2020, was there something specifically that caused Senate spending to almost double like that, or what can we attribute that to?
Well, again, it depends on which states have high open seats or just highly competitive races with outside spending, jacking up the amount that the candidates have to spend. So they're not just spending to beat their opponents, they're spending to respond to or jump the gun on all of the outside spending groups that are dumping money into their race where it's seen as a really critical race. There was also, of course, the Georgia runoff in 2020, again, as well as this cycle. So yeah, just, and the presidential cycle. I mean, that brings out, much more firepower generally. So even in House races. But for the Senate, it really is just dependent on, is it New York and California that have that have races that are up for election? And we can go back to, you can go to OpenSecrets and see the list of the top most expensive Senate races and House races in each cycle. All right. So, and then state level, again, we see the same pattern, record sums, partly fueled by ballot measures, but relative parity between the states. One interesting difference this cycle, it was that compared with the two previous cycles, fundraising was higher earlier in the cycle than is typical, and reasons, we're not sure. Maybe it was related to January 6th. Definitely more aggressive fundraising tactics across the board, more candidates running in unusually competitive Republican primaries. And I'll say more about that in a moment, and redistricting, forcing incumbents to fend off challengers or even other incumbents as challengers and to spend money introducing themselves to new voters. So we saw lower spending just before the election, which is quite unusual, but perhaps due to inflation and the economy, just, there are more constraints. I did want to circle back to the Republican primaries. I think that's really interesting. I'm sure you've written about it because some of these Republican primaries had really hard right candidates promoted by the Democrats because they wagered correctly that they would, if more extreme Republicans won in the primary, it'd be easier to beat them in the general. And they were. And in the 6 races where they succeeded in boosting right-wing candidates, Democrats won in the general, so get ready for more cross-party meddling in 24. Outside spending, just before Election Day, spending by super PACs and other outside groups reporting to the FEC shot past the $2 billion mark, blowing past the 2018 inflation-adjusted record of $1.6 billion, and even exceeding the 2020 record, $2.2 billion spent on congressional races. So this is, a big part of the reason for the huge upward jumps. Again, this is possible because of the Supreme Court Citizens United decision in 2010, paving the way for super PACs and non-disclosing nonprofits to raise unlimited sums from unlimited sources to spend unlimited sums on mailers, TV, online radio ads, peer-to-peer texting, and other independent expenditures for and against a candidate. Super PACs have to disclose their, I'm sure you all have this down, but we have to say it because we keep seeing these mistakes in stories. Super PACs have to disclose their finances to the FEC. However, many accept funds from so they're not dark money organizations, but many do accept money from non-disclosing or dark money groups, often affiliated with super PACs, with the super PAC. And we call this dark money because it leaves all of us in the dark about where the money's coming from. So voters don't have the information they need and deserve, frankly, to weigh the credibility of the messages they're being bombarded with. And in 2020 and 22, most outside spending groups shifted from being fully disclosed to being partially disclosing, such as when, again, the super PAC accepts significant money from dark money groups. Here are the, actually, let me go to this one. The top 501c nonprofits, super PACs received $606 million from 501cs, mostly. These are dark money organizations. As you can see, the liberal organizations, progressive organizations, giving quite a bit and far more than in most prior cycles since 2010. The top nonprofit is Majority Forward, spending giving $75.8 million to super PACs, and then the next two, One Nation, the group that Karl Rove commandeered after American Crossroads looked iffy at the IRS, and also American Action Network, those spending $74 million and $46 million, or giving $74 million and $46 million, respectively. And then how much did the top 10 groups spend? Another theme is the top super PACs are dominated by the parties now. So as you can see, the top two outside groups are Senate Leadership Fund and a Congressional Leadership Fund, and then followed by the Democrats, Senate and House PACs, the DCCC, the NRCC, on down. These top four party leader super PACs also have dark money affiliates that have steered more than $295 million from secret donors into federal elections. And we can see about half of that was spent on TV and online ads, and half went to super PACs. But no spending and no donors have been disclosed to the FEC. For those, One Nation spent over $124 million, and it's affiliated with the Senate Leadership Fund at the top, and that money was undisclosed. And then Majority Forward, affiliated with the Democratic Senate leadership, spent more than $74 million. Some of these dark money groups funded pop-up super PACs created just before an election so voters can't see where the money's coming from before they vote. And in many cases, these outside groups overwhelm all candidate spending, including primaries and generals. Super PACs and other outside groups spent more than all candidates combined in a record 56 races last year versus just 28 races half as many in the 2018 in the midterm. So this is another more evidence of just the primacy of outside spending. Yeah.
Money that we don't know where something's coming from, or information that isn't coming from voters. I was wondering if you might have any thoughts on the whole George Santos situation. That seems to be the question on a lot of people's minds, is where did he get the money to, give his campaign this or that? And for reporters, is there anything you would say, tell them on how to approach this, very seemingly bizarre situation?
Yes. Yes, tell us who you really are. It was especially frustrating for us because it hit right just as we closed for the holidays. But this is one of those quagmires where we're digging into the filings and doing the same sleuthing that you are, trying to find the original source. But this, I think goes beyond what we typically can unearth based on, using sources to follow the thread down to whatever original donors there may be. But again, I will say that Anna's work on foreign influence, including both foreign lobbying and also foreign spending, foreign donations, can be useful, and so she can be a resource for you. I'm not making any allegations about where the money came from, but there is, only so much we can tease out of what is disclosed if what's disclosed is not complete. But I will, again, not to say where it is coming from, but I just feel like we are in a dangerous place when money can come from any foreign source, any foreign government, corporation, individual, oligarch, and it's easier than ever before. And we saw this in the 90s with the whole now it seems almost quaint, the sums that were used, but just the network of money coming from, in the 90s, soft money to the Democrats primarily, but also some to the Republican Party, from Indonesia, from Korea, from Hong Kong, and, scads of other places since. This is just really absurd that in a democracy we would allow secret money to flow, because if it's secret, it's an honor system. You can't know if the money is coming from a foreign adversary or a dangerous source. And so it now opens up the question of campaign finance being a risk to national security. Not now, it always has been in a privately funded system. And, for that matter, it could be coming from cartels, drug cartels. Obama had received money from Mexican national involved in, or connected to, his family connected to organized crime. Like, no candidate wants to be receiving this money, but they're raking it in hand over fist. And now so much of the money is going to outside groups, so they have no control over kind of the risk assessment or the ability to take precautions. But yeah, we're in dangerous, not uncharted, we've been here before, but even more dangerous territory. So yeah, I think, again, when the outside spending is billions of dollars, again, $2 billion out of 16.7, maybe not the top story, but they don't care about the vast majority of candidates. They only care about those where they have, they're running their assessments to find out where they have the best opportunity for a return on investment. And so again, we're seeing them overwhelm more and more races as we did in 22. And so I anticipate that will continue to be a trend, because there is, there's no bottom to the number of wealthy people apparently interested in using that money to try to influence political outcomes. And in fact, in just Pennsylvania, I mean, it's crazy that $405 million spent just on one Senate seat, $400 million. And there was even more, of course, in Georgia, where there was the additional runoff, 437 million. Foreigners find this astonishing. I provide the overview of what's happening in the U.S. elections to, foreign delegations, election observer missions, and they're just gobsmacked that we would allow such a system. German parliamentarians have told me that I think they spent like $140 million for all races in their entire country. So one Senate seat is far more than was spent on all races in entire countries. And who's funding these groups? The top donor is a mainstay of Democratic mega donors, George Soros. Interestingly, the money hadn't been used; it had been given, but not deployed. The list also includes, of course, Sam Bankman-Fried, the once billionaire, now bankrupt crypto entrepreneur and fraudster. He now ranks 7th. This is an older chart, but he's down 1 since this chart was published. Republican top donors led by longtime conservative power player Richard Uihlein, the Wisconsin packaging mogul, Amazon, and cardboard had a good run through COVID, a lucrative business with so many of us using Amazon to order our supplies. And he's also heir to the Schlitz brewing fortune. And the top donor list also includes PayPal co-founder and tech billionaire Peter Thiel, who bankrolled the J.D. Vance and Blake Masters Senate races in Ohio and Arizona. So you see how one person can have extraordinary impact on the potentially, not that Thiel was successful in both cases, but how these people can have extraordinary impact compared to the vast majority of donors and Americans. In fact, one recent study based on our data reports that a tiny group of 465 American billionaires pumped over $881 million into federal midterm races. And even it's even more concentrated. The top 20 donor households have contributed nearly 3/4 of that, more than 643 million. So 20 couples gave 643 million, or 70% of all billionaire contributions in the 22 elections. So to wrap up, we faced a host of issues. Many of them are longstanding. These are baked into our system. It's a system that depends on money, some of it quite legitimately. It takes a lot of money to run in big states with large populations, but it should have been. We thought that technology was going to democratize, make it cheaper to run, but there is this, it's instead of the military industrial complex, it's the political consulting industrial complex that's running, I think, driving a lot of the spending in American elections. So it's kind of on autopilot. And as long as there's a supply of money, which there seems to be no end of, I think this is where we will remain for some time to come. I do think, however, as divided as America is, I think Americans across the ideological spectrum don't want a government for sale. They may not kind of think about what that infers and what that means for their participation, but I think there is always hope that people will understand that this will not change unless and until there is some catalyst, be it a scandal or be it people getting fed up or a new generation coming in and saying this is garbage. So we don't, again, we're not a campaign finance reform organization, but we wouldn't be doing this if we thought that everything was fine. And it's just, there's nothing to worry about here. We also take hope in the notion that we get so much feedback from people who are really earnest and really care deeply about and have ideas for what could change. And, we're not an organizing organization. So, but there are more and more organizing outlets for their advocacy. And we hope the goal, again, is for people to access this information and to provide it in a way that is easy for them to absorb and use in their engagement. And another reason for hope is the growth of journalism outlets, especially those nonprofit journalism outlets that are kind of filling in the gaps where for-profit news companies have departed, helping with to serve underserved communities, especially where there are news deserts. I'm on the board of the Institute for Nonprofit News. When we joined in 2011, I think it was like 100 or maybe 150 news organizations, and it's now more than 400, and I think they're projecting it'll be growing to 600 by the end of 2024. So I think that is really a hopeful sign. So we want to be there to serve you, to serve them, and we're trying to make this as easily absorbed on the kind of retail side, but also accessible for you so that you have what you need when you need it and don't have to kind of get in the queue to ask for requests. So if you have ideas about how we can do that, making our website more useful to you, we're all ears, because we're, again, going through this massive tech lift this year, and we hope you'll see the evidence of that before November. I hope I see the evidence of that before November. It's funny, I was just packing an hour or two. We've downsized, like so many others. We've left our office, which I loved, to move over to the OpenGov hub across the street. So we'll be in the AP building. And going through stuff, it's been fascinating to see just the files about all the scandals, the more things change. But also, again, the outreach from just everyday people saying, like, I've got ideas about how we can fix this thing. Like, this is terrible. So, again, it's really inspiring for us to be online and free and serving all these different communities. So I hope that was helpful. Glad to take your questions.
Thank you so much for that. My name is Naomi. I'm with the Washington Examiner. Just wanted to double check just the reporting cycle. So basically it's the end of the month after the end of a quarter, is that? And then second, when we get these disclosed filings, what are the key figures that we should be looking for? Should we be calculating the cash on hand, the burn rate? How do we get the information that you're providing with us and sort of figure out if the campaign is healthy, etc.?
Mm-hmm. We're happy to assist, but generally we're looking at it, you're looking at it at like midnight on the filing day. So at that point, we say you don't want to rely on us. You want to go to the filings and cherry pick and get your information. But we also are ingesting the summary data and updating that every day. So that will be fresh right after a filing. Typically, after a quarterly filing, it's the reporting deadline is, so after a quarter, the reporting deadline is on the 15th. After the year end, it is due on the 31st of January. And we also have monthly filers filing on the 20th of every month. So, depending on what you're looking at, you definitely want to know those dates, because sometimes, again, you get the monthly filing, but it doesn't have key information. You have to wait for the quarterly, and likewise, you're missing the boat if you're not on those monthly filers, especially when it's a super PAC, hugely active.
Federal candidates are usually just and presidential campaigns, like that kind of the two things that I watch. What day?
Presidential files monthly, and candidates can file monthly, but generally file quarterly. Super PACs, likewise, can file monthly or quarterly. And lobbying is kind of the other side of the influence buying coin. That's updated on the 20th after each quarter. In fact, we have a filing deadline tomorrow. So we'll be updating the lobbying data on our website in the few days following. Again, summary data is updated automatically on our site every day. Outside spending, super PAC activity is updated, well, I don't know, several times every day. But it's good to just touch base, but to know exactly if you're on a tight deadline. But generally, we're ingesting the data right after a filing deadline. And in order to serve reporters so that the data is there as quickly as possible, but it does, depending on the type of data, if we're coding it by industry, standardizing it by organization, and then presenting it on our site, it may be several days after a filing before we have that on our site. Oh, sorry.
Just to follow up, and then so like let's say we get this raw data, just in terms of helping figure out what's important when we see them, is there anything tips that you can give for that? Like, as I said, are the most important, like we can see how much money they bring in, how much money they spend. Are there other things that we should be calculating from it as to be good reporters?
Well, you know, typically you're looking for the big money, but also bundles. If it is hard money going to the candidates, whether you're seeing patterns in the data that indicate that there was, you know, an effort to direct a lot of money to the candidate, and then of course understanding the sources. You know, it's easier perhaps if you're focused on one state or region. You might be more familiar with the candidates and the power players in that area. I always look for family members, because that can also indicate a bundle that is being engineered by family. And of course, family can also be connected to super PACs, nominally independent super PACs, even affiliated with the candidate. So yeah, I think it pays to be familiar. It's harder when you're a national reporter and you're just, you know, boiling the ocean. But if you can focus on key people and understand kind of who you expect to see based on prior filings, and then see the variations and look for patterns that indicate bundles. Also, obviously, looking at loans, Santos being the latest example of why that's important. Yeah, there's are probably, you know, 20 other things that I should be telling you. But that's what I'm looking for. And to be honest, I'm not the one up at midnight absorbing these filings, not anymore.
Please say your name and news org, like typical press conference. Yeah, go ahead, Matthew. If the light is green,
Light
it's
is on. Okay, great. Oh, hello. Good morning. Hi, I'm Matthew Choi. I'm with the Texas Tribune. I wanted to ask about oftentimes for Oppo research pitches, they'll oftentimes say something like, you know, XYZ candidate, you know, scandal, like FEC is requesting more information. They had faulty filings or something of that sort. But it actually turns out to be like a really petty, like 50-cent difference or something like that. How common are those kinds of discrepancies that might need to be clarified? Like, what advice you have for determining what is just like a small, honest oopsie and what's like actually like, oh my goodness, Watergate, or like some big scandal or something like that. And then on the topic of foreign dark money, this seems like a substantial national security threat. Like, is the intelligence community like have like a branch at all like dedicated to that, investigating that? What guardrails, if any, are there to make sure that, you know, like the FSB isn't like pouring money into campaigns?
So on the Oppo research, you know, yeah, they're digging, they're trying to find the evidence of malfeasance. And yeah, often they're coming up with like not quite so outrageous. Yeah, over the years, I've been trained by people at the Federal Election Commission responding to my breathless, like, isn't this a scandal? Isn't this crazy? And they're like, no, actually, that's really common and typical. And even, excessive contributions. I mean, we used to file complaints in the early 90s about the long list of excessive contributions. But we're met with kind of a blasé response from the Federal Election Commission because it'll get repaid, like it'll get reattributed to a spouse, or it'll get redesignated for the primary or the general or another election. So I think it can be a scandal if somebody is giving like $25,000 instead of $2,900, or it might just be, they were sloppy and, it gets disclosed in they're not trying to hide it because it got disclosed in the filing and maybe they had a new, young, inexperienced treasurer, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I would approach with caution, presume that this is to be explained, but it needs to be explained. It's just that I'd say most often it is not evidence of malfeasance. And then on foreign donations, absolutely. We've gotten calls from the FBI for years and years. So we know they suck in our data and are using it. But again, if it's not disclosed, if it's not in the reports to the FEC, then we're all in the same boat doing this digging. Presumably they have more tools than we do. And the FARA office, has recently, I think, done a better job of digging into the filings. We certainly have been mining the Foreign Agents Registration Act data and update that on our website daily on the Foreign Lobby Watch. Caution again, a lot of that isn't lobbying. A lot of it is just trade, tourism spending. But there is also, I think there are really, there's great information buried in there. And often, this blew my mind, to learn that countries can file their FARA reports. I know this isn't campaign finance, but I just learned this and I'm so outraged. Countries can file their Foreign Agent Registration Act filings with DOJ on a thumb drive. And we do not see that unless you go to DOJ and look at the thumb drive and see if it's like, oh, that was like on a thumb drive because it's video, it's legit. But they can also just put everything on there. So yeah, there's video, but there's also like all of the filings that are scanned that we would normally have ingested and put into Foreign Lobby Watch. So, and then of course, COVID hits and nobody can go to DOJ, even if you wanted, that you're not allowed. So, and that's another thing is that we are here not to replicate what the FEC and DOJ and other disclosure agencies, the Secretary of the Senate, the Clerk of the House do. We're here to present it in a way that adds value and is perhaps a little more accessible to people, while also, again, happy to provide the granular level detail that reporters or academics need to vet it. But during COVID, and actually even before that, there were frequently times when we had data up on our site from the FCC or FARA office at DOJ, and you couldn't access it on their site. At DOJ, we have a full text search of all foreign lobbying back to the 40s, and it's much better than what you can access at using the DOJ FARA site. Similarly, the FCC site for broadcast ads, political ads, was frequently down, and we were the only source. So that should never happen. Like, that's just ridiculous that a dinky nonprofit like us would be the better source than a government agency.
James and then Brian.
Yeah, hi, I'm James. I'm with Fox. All right, back here. I had a question, more specific for the recent Ted Cruz Supreme Court case about the financial disclosures. They can go about 250,000. Is that something that you are able to track, or any recommendations of how we can necessarily? It's been a little bit confusing of exactly where the sources of that money that's coming back and being loaded back into the campaigns, or is that something you plan on tracking because it can be unlimited?
I haven't thought about that, but I presume it is going to be, I just presumed it is going to be reported like normal, and others may have.
Is it something that we need to be able to look for? Because I was curious, I had never really looked at that more specifically, but is it something that on a specific filing that they have to disclose? Do they have to give the original source that it has to be from the campaign? I just saw that was something that really changed a lot, or may change, or is it not that significant really at all, beside in terms of reporting wise, but maybe just the amount of money is the headline.
Yeah, I mean, that's new enough that the FEC probably wouldn't have leapt on it to create any new form or anything. I had just presumed that we'd be getting the details on that in the existing candidate forums. So I will have to dig into that myself and find out, but that's a great question.
Brian and then Minnie, and then if you could pass it down to this end.
Brian Mesker with Insider. Just wanted to ask you kind of a more high level question, which is, as someone who is looking at this data every day, has a certain level of expertise, I'm curious if there are any things that you see in mainstream coverage of money in politics that you think fall short, or certain pet peeves you have, ways that people are covering this wrong?
Well, as I had said, just continuing to see the conflation of super PACs and non-disclosing nonprofits. It's, it is arcane. It is a little bit complex to have to explain, yes, they disclose, but the disclosure they give isn't really disclosure, so we don't really know where the money came from. And then they could be a hybrid carry committee, so they might be giving money directly to candidates, but they can't be connected. They can't be doing that unless they're totally independent and non-coordinating with the candidates. And so, but it's just, are they not coordinating? It's an honor system again. So the whole, I understand the challenge that reporters have to, put it into context, but also you only have, so many words for your story, and you're not there to go into, in-depth backgrounder. And this is why there are, so many election lawyers trying to interpret and push the envelope for these rules over and over again. Yeah, so other pet peeves. No, I mean, it used to be that the focus on PACs was so overblown, but that, that's like unions. PACs are just, kind of on their way out as a source, and small donors are replacing them. That too is a complicated issue because of, on the one hand, small donations being presumed to be more democratic and a good thing for democracy, more Americans getting involved. Donations are a perfectly legitimate way to engage in politics on the one hand. On the other hand, so many of the top recipients of small donations are the most extreme anti-democratic candidates. Extreme on either the left or the right, and also, election objectors. And so that is, I think, a trend that will continue, that will bear more scrutiny and understanding. Is that a good thing? Stop, or is it more complicated, and what are the trends? We're looking into the data for donations to the election count objectors and others who have expressed kind of some anti-democratic views, and looking at their donors to see who those donors are also giving to down ballot, to see kind of, well, who is the next, who's coming up in the ranks that will be adding to the ranks of the more extreme candidates. And this can be on the right or the left, to see kind of using the data for predictive analysis. Can you see anything based on, well, we know this donor, but we know this donor is a big donor to these candidates, but yeah, where else are they active? I think there's always been a sense that those with the large S at the federal level have an opportunity, some if they're in leadership, an obligation to build the farm team, sending money down ballot to ensure that their ranks are being growing and being replaced. And I think there's been maybe an insufficient attention paid to that, kind of these connections to down ballot candidates and where they're getting money from, and the nationalization of races.
Do you have a hard stop, or can we do
No,
a few
I'm
more?
fine.
Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Minnie Raker. I work at Time. 2 questions. You've sort of touched on both of these, but one thing is that I was trying to use OpenSecrets for a story like last month, and one of the kind of speed bumps was I didn't feel like I had a good enough grasp on where all the data was coming from and any caveats it might come with. Like, I know there are FEC filings. I've looked at those documents. That's kind of my level of understanding, but I would love to kind of just have a little more on the methodology and any caveats when I use your data in the future. Second question is like any great stories, breaking news, or bringing attention to a campaign finance issue that hadn't gotten attention that reporters have done with your data that you would want to call attention to.
Yeah, the caveats, I mean, the data should be explained, the source and the date that it was collected should be explained in the footnotes. There's always been a tension between making sure that reporters could go to the methodology at the bottom of the page and see to know exactly where they got it and what it's, when it was downloaded. You won't see what date it's through, because it's through different dates for different filings, but you'll see the date downloaded and know, oh, that was last week or last month, and kind of know whether it's whether there might be more recent data. So that is the big one. For the campaign finance reports, it is so if we go to, can I show the website?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at a typical member profile, you'll see, and this has been recently revised, so hopefully to make it a little more intelligible, a little more interesting and less laden. But there's always been this tension between giving you all the detail and also giving you data that isn't too text heavy. So you'll see on a member profile the option to go back in time by cycle, the option to look at it for the campaign or the leadership PAC. You'll see down here is leadership PAC, majority committee, MC PAC for Kevin McCarthy, and the combined campaign committee and leadership PAC. So just know that you have that option when you're looking at the data to look at all of the donors to both the candidate and the leadership PAC, which I think in most cases is legitimate to look at, because if you are a donor that is interested in currying favor with Kevin McCarthy, as so many are, to party leadership in particular, you can max out to the candidate, but then you can move on to max out to the leadership PAC, which is money that they get to dole out to other candidates. So it's just, a slush fund that they get to use. You'll see then, options to view the totals raised and spent, the top industries, the top contributors. All of that is coming from the same reports. Totals raised, he's doing much better these last couple cycles, and way better than the rest of Congress. You'll see up here, elections takes you to the race profile. So if you want to look not just at him, but how he did compared to his competition, you see that it was a blowout, that there virtually was no competition. See, the outside spending didn't even bother. It's like, okay, we've got better places to invest. The top contributors, again, if you're just looking, we have to put this here. The organizations themselves did not contribute. It's the PACs or the individual executives that are included in these amounts. And you can, again, look at this. Sorry, if we go back here. Oh, sorry. On the member profile, you can look at it for candidate and leadership PACs, but here in the race profile, it's just the candidates. So again, looking at top contributors for McCarthy, I always like to look through this just to make sure that there aren't any duplicates. We do our best, but with hundreds of millions of data points, we are, over time, we are always leveraging automation, the computer to do the matching, the entity resolution, but there's always some that slip by, especially for the candidates that are raising less money or of less high profile than leadership. Industries, totals by sector, not at all surprising that other, which includes retired people, is huge for him. That's where it comes from. Labor, I mean, again, going through these files of today of kind of in purging, it's been interesting to see how labor used to be such a force in politics. And I remember somebody from a union, I think, asked me saying back in 2002, when they banned soft money to the national parties, they were like, great, we can take the money and just spend it ourselves as a 527, or on 527 organizations. But just, gradually, they were already low compared to business and just gradually petering out. So it'll be interesting to see now with the new kind of more grassroots take on labor organizing, if that eventually includes political activism as well. So that's why finance is overwhelmingly the top source of campaign finance support, but for retired and non-wage earning spouses. You can look at it just for PACs, look at it by geography to see where the money's coming from. Again, mostly out of state for a party leader. They're collecting, it's a national race because they're a party leader, but you could look at it for in-state, out of state, in district, out of district when that's available, and then outside spending. And link to, let me just see. And then link to any stories that have been written. In terms of breaking news, we are always happy to provide background insights, provide data confidentially, so we do not share the information you're providing. There are times when our media staff have actually provided information to the reporter calling, and the reporter says, ooh, that's great, can I write that story? And so we're happy to do that. Sometimes if it's our story, it becomes or our idea, it becomes a co-reported story, but there are always people, again, in research or media who are happy to walk through it with you.
Jillian.
Hi. Hi, I'm kind of hiding back here. I'm Jillian. I'm with the Sacramento Bee, McClatchy. Building off of Brian and Minnie's questions, what are some of the effective ways you've seen people report on campaign finance, especially to local markets that hold a lot of people who don't even know what campaign finance is, and a lot of them don't care to know at all?
Interesting. You know, I think that's one of the big challenges for reporters and frankly, for researchers as well, is making the connection to people and their daily lives. We're all too busy just trying to, you know, do whatever it is we do day to day. And politics has grown so divisive, kind of repugnant for a lot of people that they're more than happy to fully check out. Like, they've been checked out for a long time. That's kind of how we got into this situation, and how they've outsourced a lot of the attention to those who are paid to pay attention, like lobbyists. And so, you know, that is, I think, the challenge, but also the opportunity for local reporters, is that they're in the community, they know who these people are, and can gain both trust because they are known, and also gain access to powerful players. You know, at the same time, again, non-disclosing, the ability to raise and spend money without disclosing the source presents that big challenge. We are, you know, I think still there are mysteries out there that we're waiting to see if anybody can break the story about where the money actually came from. But, you know, year after year, these people get inadvertently outed, or maybe through the efforts of the Panama Papers or the Paradise Papers. You know, there are opportunities for reporters, but they may not be as, you know, as routine or obvious. It's too bad, because we used to get more information from the 990s. We get far less now, but we are still mining those, and that could be a rich source of kind of documenting the spheres of influence in the networks. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't be calling. You're calling.
Oh, that's okay. No, yeah, Hannah, and then Hugo.
Hi, I'm Hannah Fingerhut with the AP. You spoke a little bit about this in your pet peeves, but I was wondering if you could speak to some changes over time, your impression of some changes over time, and in particular, the growth of flooding state wide races with outside of state money, specifically, you know, that huge Georgia runoff in 2021, right? In terms of the nationalization of campaigns, and also that trickle down effect, right? Like a lot of increased attention to, you know, local school boards, for example, right? Like where, how has that sort of changed the dynamic of fundraising and where the money is going to?
Yeah, that is fascinating. It seems to me that a lot of organizing has been very purposely done out of view, and so we're now seeing blitz on at the state and local level, and that is those are the connections that we're trying to tease out in looking at both the outside spending and looking for those big spenders, again, on the left and the right. This is not really a one side or the other, and how they are networking and spending down at the state level. The local level is harder for us. We are tracking actually money in a few municipalities. We're tracking money in New York. That'll be an interesting place to look back on after 24 to see what their public financing system does, because they've put together an interesting kind of calculus of how people get publicly funded. But there's already pushback on that, of course. And then the work we're doing to track the donors to fringe candidates and where those donors are going down ballot, I think is another opportunity for us to see whether there are patterns that might indicate networks. Will we be able to track those networks back to a source? I'm not sure. Certainly back in 2012, right after Citizens United was passed, we were able to track the 400 million raised by the Koch network through a huge number of organizations, but now the heft is on the left in outside spending, and it's not Koch, it's the 1630 Fund, Arabella Advisors, et cetera, that kind of is using the same playbook. So I think there is evidence of success with that if there is coordination, you can set up all of these kind of affinity groups within a network to ensure that these groups are ensuring that they are taking advantage of every organizing as well as fundraising opportunity. I think the biggest impact perhaps from Citizens United, but certainly from the Koch network, has been Americans for Prosperity and their amazing ground game and outreach. So I'm not sure that has been replicated on the left, but that was an investment for years, if not decades to come, that we're continuing to see them reap the benefits of. So in school boards, we're hearing from reporters saying, do you know what's going on? But we don't track at the local level, and we don't have data on school boards. That's, I think, a rich vein to tap.
Final question to Hugo.
Hey, Hugo Lowe with The Guardian. You mentioned the kind of Panama Papers and like Pandora Papers previously, and when those came out, we're part of the ICIJ consortium. When you looked at those, what were the kind of things you were tracking? Kind of what sort of money flows from, whether it's offshore accounts into the US? I mean, could you kind of speak a little bit about what kind of contributions you were looking at, and what kind of, if there was another leak of a similar nature, what you would be trying to track?
We were not involved or reporting on the Panama Papers. We do hear from and assist journalists across the globe. Usually they're just looking to understand what the heck is going on here. But we, so I guess I would.
My only question was because kind of OpenSecrets, I know, put together like a summary of some of the contributions, and I don't know if there was anything that stood out to you. I don't know, particularly in terms of how kind of foreign money inflows were entering the U.S. Maybe that's too specific.
Yeah, I guess I would refer you back to the reporter. I mean, we all know that Delaware, was the first and the best haven, and now it's exploded to states like South Dakota. But we have not been a participant in that investigation. What we can add to that is just the investments that are the connections that we're making through review of the 990 501c organizations. But that is, so that's kind of been our specialty.
Sheila, thank you for the work you do and the time you shared with us today.
Of course.